top story this hour. Government says the very purpose of state of emergency is to avert threats against nation. And the US threatens to impose sanctions on Ethiopia using humanitarian crisis as pretext. A very warm welcome to this news hour. I'm Solomon Danye. Thanks for joining me. The House of People's Representatives has approved the state of emergency that was referred to it by the Council of Ministers last Tuesday. The state of emergency will remain in force for 6 months. It is indicated in the proclamation document that the terrorist TPLF and its affiliates pose a grave and imminent danger against the existence and sovereignty of the country. It is to be recalled that the Council of Ministers declared the state of emergency in a bid to protect the community and the nation at large from a security threat posed by the terrorist group. The proclamation is needed considering the gravity of the killings, looting, and other cruel and inhuman attacks that are being perpetrated by the terrorist TPLF and its affiliates against civilians in several parts of the country. Ministry of Justice says the very purpose of the state of emergency is to avert the threat posed against national existence and sovereignty. This remark came while the Ministry of Justice with Foreign Affairs briefed Addis Ababa-based diplomatic community on the state of emergency concerns. Gushum Eliso has compiled the following report.
We are not concerned about the state of emergency.
The protection that the government will be taken.
Joint briefing of the Ministry of Justice and Foreign Affairs to the Addis-based diplomatic communities indicated the very purpose of the state of emergency is to avert the threat posed against national existence and sovereignty.
The objective of the proclamation and the need for it arises out of the fact that we are facing a grave threat against national sovereignty, not only our national sovereignty, but the territorial integrity of the state. We believe that the TPLF and its terrorist proxies and allies are posing a grave threat, some might even say an existential threat to the Ethiopian state. Under these circumstances, to avert this danger, we have found it to be necessary to provide the appropriate law enforcement agencies, security agencies, with additional powers to counter this threat. So that is the objective and the necessity of the proclamation.
Gideon highlighted except diplomatic impunity and other privileges in accordance with Vienna Convention, other substantive procedural laws inconsistent with proclamation shall remain suspended.
With the exception of the diplomatic immunities and privileges provided under that convention, other substantive and procedural laws inconsistent with this proclamation shall remain suspended during the implementation of this proclamation. So while the immunities and the privileges that arise out of this convention, while this convention remains intact, other substantive laws, other procedural laws and rules that are inconsistent with the proclamation will be suspended.
Some diplomatic communities questioned about the protection and timeline of proclamation.
What will be the protection that the government will be taken for the diplomatic corps and their families is one of the questions. The second, if the curfew will be implemented, what will be the timeline?
The state of emergency proclamation is expected to be applicable. It's expected to be operational for the next 6 months since the date of its adoption.
The statement said additional directives will be issued in the coming days for more clarification.
There could be additional directives that could be issued in the coming few days to clarify some aspects of the state of emergency proclamation and to make some aspects of the proclamation more effectively operational.
The state of emergency will be operational for 6 months throughout the country and probably will be extended according to constitutional provision.
Ethiopia's flagship project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is expected to start early power generation in a month or so, despite the deadlock in the negotiation between the three riparian countries. What is the meaning of early power generation for the entire endeavor of the construction of the mega dam? To tell us more about this landmark event, I'm now joined here by Dr. Truso Asafa, a water resource expert by profession. Thank you, Dr. Truso, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by highlighting the early power generation that the country is set to launch in a month or so. What does this stage mean for the construction of the dam?
It means a lot. Right now they are about 83%. When they start to generate, a couple of things happen. One, they can send power to the national grid, which is already done. Second, they will be able to control the water that goes to downstream countries. So right now, if you see, the water is going on the top of the structure. So if they are able to pass it through the turbine, then they can control and lower the middle portion, and they can raise it quick. So from now onward, it's going to be a faster way in terms of construction. So that's a big milestone.
Great. Egypt and Sudan were crying loud to force Ethiopia sign a binding agreement before starting generating power from the dam. What is the problem with signing a binding agreement over your own dam?
Well, the issue is not about signing the binding agreement. What type of binding agreement is the big issue? Because what they are proposing is Ethiopia would sign an agreement that will allow water to flow forever with 0% share for Ethiopia. In other words, Ethiopia will not be able to expand agriculture upstream of the GERD, as well as use for water supply. I work in a water supply, for example, industry, and we expect that significant amount. It's not like the irrigation, but the significant amount Ethiopia needs too. So it's not about signing itself. The other thing I think people need to know is that GERD is just only one sub-basin. You can't agree water sharing agreement on only one of the sub-basin. You have to look at the entire basin and see how much water is. First of all, they don't want you to know even how much water is within the entire Nile basin. So for Ethiopia, it doesn't make sense at all, binding agreement, especially the proposal they put forth simply binds Ethiopia, and we won't be able to do irrigation expansion or water supply.
Yeah. So they have been warning about the second filling, but Ethiopia disproved all doubts that the filling does not harm any of them. So what are they still concerned? Why are they still concerned about Ethiopia building a mega dam on its own river?
The issue is not about filling, by the way, because if we see the downstream countries, first of all, Sudan, Ethiopia is releasing enough water for Sudan. Egypt has water, their dam is full. In fact, it's the highest in 30 years. So not only the second filling, the third filling, all the way the first filling, which we call up to 74 billion cubic meter, will not impact at all. But the issue is that they want to use GERD now to bind Ethiopia to sign an agreement that will not let Ethiopia to use anything except GERD. That's it. That's the issue. But otherwise, they know there is enough water right now. GERD will not have any impact in terms of filling it now. That's what they want.
Finally, Ethiopia is currently under fire. The Biden administration continues its undue pressure on the East African nation. As an Ethiopian living in the diaspora, what do you think should Ethiopians like you do to help the country come out of this situation stronger?
The situation is concerning for all of us as a diaspora, as a Ethiopian living in America as well. Ethiopia right now, what it needs is more of our food security, actually. In fact, expanding and working on some of our irrigation projects, water supply and so on, not the things what we are seeing right now. As I came here the last several days, I was able to communicate with many ministries, and there are encouraging things what they are doing in terms of food self-sufficiency. I believe that all the kick can go back to the GERD and other issues. Once we get all this, food self-sufficiency, that will be the big. That's why this third power generation as well as the next fillings are very important. So I know that many people are concerned like me. I hope that things will soon work out. That's how I see it.
Yeah, we hope so. Dr. Turuso Asafa, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
አባቶቻችን የተረከብንሽ እናት ሀገራችን የምንወድሽ ለጅብ ይሁን እንጂ ለአሞራ ስጋችን አንቺ አትደፈሪም ይፈሳል ደማችን ተከብረሽ ኑርሽው በአባቶቻችንም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም አንድ ላይ ተከብረሽ ኑርሽው በአባቶቻችንም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም ተከብረሽ ኑርሽው በአባቶቻችን ደም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም
US President Joe Biden has sent his special envoy for the Horn of Africa to Ethiopia to push for an end to increased fighting that has worsened fears of an unfolding humanitarian crisis. Jeffrey Feltman is sent to Ethiopia to urge Ethiopia's government and the terrorist Tigray People's Liberation Front to come to the negotiation. State Minister of Foreign Affairs Redwan Hussein says Ethiopia is ready to hear from the envoy.
Enough collateral damage sustained, and then this is the last best opportunities that we could capitalize on to avoid such catastrophe. And then I hope the other side will listen to that, and we also hope the international community could capitalize on this situation to force the other side and then iron out, because there are attempts. UN already assigned special envoy. I think we are expecting Obasanjo to arrive soon, and we are ready to listen to what he has to offer and what he has to come up with as a solution.
Freelance photojournalist and former staffer with over 30 years shooting experience in the US and Africa and a former resident of Addis Ababa, Jamal Contes wrote an article about TPLF's brutal and inhuman atrocities against the people of Amhara. Kason Jani tells us more.
In his article, Jamal Countess, a renowned freelance photojournalist, depicted it was exactly this time a full year ago, about 10 p.m. Ethiopian time, on November 3, 2020, that commandos of the Tigray Special Forces and affiliated TPLF-aligned militias attacked 5 bases of the Northern Command of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, gaining control of the bases and seizing what has been reported as over 60% of the country's heavy ordnance, automatic weapons and mechanized assets. In addition to the looted weapons, unconfirmed reports, which cannot be verified due to the sensitive nature of the information, claim that over 6,000 soldiers of the Ethiopian National Defense Force were massacred or tortured and killed beyond the initial surprise nighttime attacks of November 3 and ensuing battles on November 4. Sources close to the ENDF claim the numbers are significantly higher, but revealing those numbers during an ongoing conflict may harm the all-round war effort. These attacks on the Northern Command were part of a larger plan that was to culminate in TPLF taking control of Ethiopia in just 2 weeks, marching on Addis Ababa and seizing control from Abiy Ahmed, the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia. So when the killing started on November 3rd at the Northern Command bases, local farm owners, most of whom happened to be retired TPLF military officers, started silently killing their ethnic Amhara day laborers. These killings took place after the day laborers were made to harvest crops which were then sent to Mekelle. The laborers had their pay withheld for a week, claiming it was coming the following week, but the only payment for their labors most of these workers received was death. They were shot in most cases, cut with sharp instruments in other cases. Their bodies were either buried on the land they harvested or removed to multiple dam sites around Maikadra in the middle of the night. The murderers, the retired TPLF officers and generals fleeing to Mekelle with harvest gathered by their former employees. The next few days will be spent honoring the dead, those who had their lives snuffed out because a group of power-hungry terrorists wanted to return to power, even though 100 million people rejected their leadership. Give them your time, your empathy, and your sympathy. He watched the towers fall from Brooklyn that September morning, and almost 3,000 of my neighbors perished in the inferno and collapse of the Twin Towers, he said. But Ethiopia experienced that national trauma in effect 3 times in 1 week. Over 7,600 people lost their lives due to the TPLF's murderous desire to subjugate Ethiopia again. Let one memorize and remember and pay respect to all of those lost, the freelance photojournalist underscored.
And in business, the US has been threatening to impose sanctions on Ethiopia using humanitarian crisis as a pretext to put pressure on the government. One of its leverage appears to be the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. Last Tuesday, the Biden administration announced that Ethiopia and 2 other African nations were banned from the Opportunity Act. The decision dismayed Ethiopians. With more in this story. It's been months since the Biden administration started to intimidate the Ethiopian government under the guise of humanitarian concerns in relation with the Tigray conflict. From threatening to impose sanctions on government officials to suspending the country from the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, the US used all its leverage to make the Ethiopian government bow to its orders. The Ethiopian government and economists have been expressing concerns over US's plan to suspend the East African nation from AGOA, citing the vulnerability of daily laborers whose lives are highly dependent on trade systems like AGOA. Many argued that using AGOA as a pretext for humanitarian concern is a paradox by itself, that the suspension is a direct attack to the poor households. In an article he wrote to argue on the issue, Mamo Mehretu, a senior policy advisor to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Ethiopia's chief trade negotiator, strongly reproached the move, saying that removal of AGOA eligibility would only worsen the condition of ordinary Ethiopians who have no connection to the Tigray conflict. Though the concern of the US about peace and security in Ethiopia is shared by many people around the world, removing it from AGOA would only expose the fledgling manufacturing in the country to an existential threat, Mamo said. Defying all legitimate concerns of the government and experts in the field, the US on Tuesday announced that it suspended Ethiopia and 2 other African nations from AGOA until these countries meet what the US is asking them to do. Reacting on the decision, the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in its statement dubbed the move as misguided. The ministry said the decision fails to take into account the commitment of the government of the United States to value the well-being of ordinary citizens. The statement added that though the government of Ethiopia understands the human rights concerns of the United States government over the ongoing conflict in northern Ethiopia, such concerns over human rights issues do not warrant the decision of the US to suspend Ethiopia's privilege over the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act (AGOA). According to the ministry, the decision will affect the livelihoods of more than 200,000 low-income families, mostly women who've got nothing to do with the conflict.
ላንቱ ለገሞ ባላላው 4 አመት ሆኖብኛል 4 ልጆች አሉኝ ይሄ ፋብሪካ የሚጠፋ ከሆነ እኔ የሚኖርበት ተይና ልጆቼን የሚያስቀምጥበት ቦታ አይታየኝም ለኔ እንዴት ሆናለሁ ይሄው 4 አመት ሙሉ እዚህ እየሰራው ነኝ በሱ ያስተዳደርኩ ነኝ እንዳይዘጉ አንዴ ለምናለሁ
ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርኩ መኖሩ ለኔ ይጠቅመኛል እና ይሄ ከዚህ ስራ የተሻለውን ለመስራት በሚገባ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርኩ ያስፈልገኛል
ከስተመሮቼ በአብዛኛው የኢንዱስትሪ ልጆች ናቸው እነሱ ካላሉ ደግሞ ምንም መስራት አልችልም የኔ ወይትም ጠፋች ማለት ነው
When the AGOA was introduced in 2000, Ethiopia exported goods worth $28 million to the United States. In 2020, that figure rose roughly tenfold and stood at close to $300 million, nearly half of it under the AGOA. Today, the two most successful exporting industries under the AGOA, apparel and leather, employ about 200,000 people directly, 80% of them young women. In Hawassa Industrial Park alone, 95% of the employees are women, providing in many cases the first ever jobs for young families. The country's removal from AGOA would deal a serious blow to the welfare of millions of low-income workers. Taking these into account, many are doubting whether the US cares about the poor. As part of expanding investments in neighboring countries, Ethiopian-owned NOC Djibouti has signed an agreement with a China construction to significantly renovate and modernize a service station worth $1.3 million on Wednesday, commending the Minister of Energy and the Ethiopian ambassador for their incredible support to facilitate conducive investment environment. Manager of NOC Djibouti, Fasil Wildemara, reiterated the company's commitment to contribute alongside public and private partners to the economic and social development of Djibouti. It is to be recalled that NOC Djibouti invested in the construction of a new service station in areas known as PK12 in 2020, which was commissioned at the beginning of 2021.
አገራችን እየተበጠበጠ እናት ወንድሞቻችን እየተገደሉ ምናምን አይተናል እና እኛ እሱን ለማቅረፍ ነው የመጣነው ከእናት ሀገሬ ፍለፊት ሆኜ ለማዋጋት ሀገሬን ለማስከበር የመጣው ኢትዮጵያ መሆናችን በጣም ስለምኮራ ወደዚህ አካባቢ መጣነው ወደ መከላከያ ሰራዊት የተቀላቀልነው ማለት እናት ሀገራችንን ለማዳን ኢትዮጵያነት ለኔ ኩራቴ ነው ግርማ ሞገሴ ነው መካበታሉት በኢትዮጵያ በመሆኔ በጣም ደስ ይለኛል አባታችን ወታደር ቤት 18 አመት አገልግሏል ሻለቃው ነው ከዛ መጥቶ ነው እኛ ያሳደገ እኛ ተወልደን እሱ ወታደር ቤት ያገለገለ ነበር ለእናት አገልግሎት ይሄ ሁሉ ሰራዊት እያለ ደግሞ ሀገራችን አትወድቅም
This is Addis News Hour. Pro-military Sudanese minister briefed the press on Wednesday and said he was optimistic the country will achieve its democratic transition. Jibril Ibrahim briefed journalists on the latest developments in the negotiations concerning government restructuring. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok remains under house arrest, but is allowed to meet with foreign envoys.
I believe that we are on the way towards a gradual transition to general stability in the country. And there are extensive negotiations to restructure the Sovereign Council, as well as extensive efforts to assign a Prime Minister and the judiciary system and hopefully things will be on the right track.
The pro-military finance minister reassured the Sudanese people that the country would achieve its democratic transition.
The formation of a government needs broad negotiations, especially after we heard General Burhan speaking about his will of forming a government that represents all Sudan's provinces and that the people who represent those provinces should be accepted by their people. So this needs more negotiations. But now the Prime Minister should be assigned in order to form the cabinet.
Before we go, a quick reminder of our top stories. Government says if the very purpose of state of emergency is to avert threats against nation. And the US threatens to impose sanctions on Ethiopia using humanitarian crisis as pretext. Well, that's it for the news from me, Solomon Danya, and the rest of the English team here in the studio. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.